So we got Jimmy Engstrom on the Skype call as well. We are going to be talking about creating great UX in Blazor. So Jimmy, how's it going?
Yeah, doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're all ready for your presentation.
Awesome.
All right, take it
Then
away,
I
Jimmy.
will I will switch over to sharing my screen. There we go. Can you see it? There we go. Welcome to this session about creating great UX with Blazor. Developers are known for making bad UIs and bad user experiences, but I believe that has changed a lot during the last couple of years. This is much because of frameworks that helps us use standardized component with a minimal effort. Another reason is that CSS has evolved a lot during the last couple of years, and so has web browsers. Compatibility issues are not as many nowadays. In the Blazor templates, Microsoft has included Bootstrap, a framework written by Twitter. There are a bunch of other frameworks as well, but I will focus on Bootstrap for the remainder of this session. For me, the big change was when my wife started a path down the UX rabbit hole, and we both started to realize the why. Why is this important? Why is this affecting the users? And why should we care? It all boils down to psychology, adapting the content on the screen to better work with the receiver, your user, probably a human. My name is Jim Engstrom, and I'm a Windows Development MVP. I work as a web developer at Erik Penser Bank here in Stockholm. My wife and I run a startup called Awesome Dev, focused on future technologies like the HoloLens, for example. And we also run a podcast together called Coding After Work. And there's a bunch of, or actually 2, Blazor-related episodes. But enough about me. We have about 35 minutes or so, and I want to share some of the reasons why you should focus on UX and how I work with Bootstrap and Sass. But first, we need to know the why. So let's start with the brain. If we know the limitations of the brain, we will figure out what we can do better. There are a bunch of neurotransmitters and hormones in our brain, but there are 4 that we usually call the happy chemicals, the ones that makes us happy. The first one is dopamine. So according to research, humans have about 4 working memory spots, plus minus 1. You might have heard 7, but more recent research says it's 3 to 5. Stress will decrease the working memory. So what can we do? Dopamine actually increases the working memory. It will make our users more motivated and more productive. To me, this sounds like awesome things to have in a user. So what can we do? We can add gamification. And I realize that that might not be the best solution for every application, but I will show you a couple of ways that you can add dopamine or gamification in your business app as well. And we can add reward-motivated behavior. The next hormone or a neurotransmitter is oxytocin. Oxytocin will make our users more grounded. They will feel happier and become more mindful. A very simple way is to add pictures of humans or other avatars. It will create a connection to the site that is really great to have. I've been working with a conference, and we've been using a tool called speaker.travel, a site that will help us book travels for our speakers. And they do this beautifully by using gravatar images of the speakers. That will create a connection from me to the site and from me to the speakers. MailChimp are using a mascot. A really, really nervous monkey is going to press that button when we're going to send out all the emails. He's even going to give me a high five. Well done. We made it. Serotonin is the next one. It increases working memory as well. It will give our users a sense of belonging, and it will regulate mood. Our users will feel more emotionally stable, less anxious, more calm, and get more focus and be more energetic. And we can do this by adding positive events. And again, our friend gamification. Very simple example of this is perhaps a step tracker or a wizard. The last happy chemical is endorphins. This will give our users a feeling of satisfaction. They will feel successful and get a feeling of achievement or even victory. And how do we achieve that? Well, you all probably already guessed it. Yes, gamification and positive reinforcement. But there is a bad guy in all of this as well. Cortisol. Cortisol is our stress hormone. It easily gives our users a sense of feeling overwhelmed. Multitasking is known to increase cortisol. Unclear error messages. So instead of saying an error occurred, say what happened and why. Suggest the next step. Find the right tone in your error messages. Perhaps you can be a little bit positive. Whoop, we made an oopsie. Or you can be a little bit more formal if your site demands it. Oxytocin is also the known enemy of cortisol. So adding oxytocin will make your users less stressed. There are really two users to a project. One is the end user, the one that we are actually developing for. But there's one more, the one that codes, the developer. So when I talk about UX, I'm talking about UX from both the developer side and the end user. So let's switch over to Visual Studio. Vue, Angular, and React has a way to use scoped CSS. Now, personally, I don't see the beauty of it. Instead of sharing CSS between all components, scoped CSS rewrites the CSS rules so that that particular component is the only one that uses that CSS. But from what I've seen is that a lot of developers are super passionate about this. So of course I want to have that in this session. There are a couple of ways of doing this, but in my opinion, the best possible way to do this right now is to use a project called Blazor Scoped CSS by Alexander Reis. The syntax differs a bit from what we're used to in other frameworks. For Vue, Angular, and React, they're actually using Webpack or something similar to package the CSS and rewrite it as they go. But for Blazor Scoped CSS, it's a little bit different. So we're going to take a look at that. The first thing we need to do is to add the Blazor Scoped CSS NuGet package. I've already done that, so you don't have to see me do that. Then we're going to go into Configure Services, and we're going to add a service. So we're going to say service, add Blazor Scoped CSS, and we're going to pass in the assembly get executing assembly. There we go. Next up, we are going to go into the pages and into our host file. Our host file, we're going to add a style component or a style tag. Let's add a style, and the ID should be scoped CSS, like that. And then we need to add a JavaScript as well. And as you saw in the first session, you can write script, and we can say content. And content is going to say that I'm going to look somewhere else. In this case, I'm going to look in the NuGet package Blazor Scoped CSS, and I'm going to include a JS interrupt JS, like that. So then we can go to fetch data. And I have added a file called fetchdata.razor.css. So this is the file that's going to contain our CSS code. So let's create a couple of CSS rules. So my first scoped component, and then we're going to add a scope ID. This is the one that's going to be replaced later on. So we're going to say that, let's say background color is going to be red. And we're going to create another one, my second scoped component, again, scoped ID. And we're going to say that background should be blue. And then we can go back into fetch data. And now it's time to add these components into our project. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add the scoped CSS components. So I'm going to say Blazor scoped CSS dot scoped style. And we're going to say that the embedded style path is going to be fetch data razor dot CSS. Then we're going to add a parent, and it's going to be this file. And then after init, we're going to make sure that the state has changed. I'm going to reference a scoped style. So let's create that scoped style down here. Blazor scoped CSS, scoped style. I'm going to name it scoped style. There we go. So now it's time to write some styling. So let's create a. We're gonna check that is scope style complete, and then we're gonna render a header. We're gonna say that our class is going to be scoped style dot CSS scoped classes, and we're gonna add a parameter scoped CSS classes, and I'm gonna say that my first scoped component. I'm gonna say that it's gonna say weather forecast as well. Let's create a paragraph. I'm going to say class scoped style, but this time we're going to say CSS classes mixed. So I'm going to say non-scoped CSS classes display 1. So this is not going to be a scoped class. Then I'm going to say scoped CSS classes, my second scoped component. And this is going to be, this component demonstrates fetching data from the service. There we go. So if I run this, we're going to see fetch data. So up here, it's going to be red and blue. So if we check out the code that is actually happening here. So on our header, we're going to have my first scoped component, and then the scoped ID is going to be replaced by isolation, which is my project name, pages, which is the folder, and fetch data, which is the page. On the other one, is display 1 is going to be there because it's not a scoped one. And I'm going to get the my second scope component and well, the same as above. If I check up here with a head, I can see that I have style, I have the scoped CSS, and up here I have the rewritten styles right here. So that's the first demo. Let's close this down and return. Then we have SAS. So this is how we typically work. For those who don't know what SAS is, SAS stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. With a name like that, how can you not love this? So this is a way of writing CSS in a more programmatic way, using variables, nesting, and loops. So Bootstrap is distributing SAS files of their framework, which makes it really easy for us to work with. In my opinion, Bootstrap has a couple of problems that we are actually going to try to solve today. HTML is a markup language that should define the data on the page, not the layout. But with Bootstrap and many other solutions, we are sometimes forced to add divs, we are forced to add some classes, and I'm not really a fan of writing classes everywhere for a couple of reasons. I need to remember the name of the class, or I need to check. And more importantly, my colleagues need to keep track of the class that I use in other parts of the application. So what we ended up doing was that we abstracted away a lot of these things and put them into components. Now I know Ed Charbonneau is going to talk about creating components later today, so I'm not going to go into depth talking about how to create these components. I will, however, share the code that I'm using here. So the first thing we need to do is to go to getbootstrap.com and click the download button. It's going to take us to a page, and we're going to scroll down a little bit where we're going to find source files. I'm going to click the download button. Now we're all set. Let's switch over to Visual Studio. I'm going to close this one. I'm going to set this as a start project instead. So the first thing we need to do, I've created a folder called styles. In that folder, I've put my Bootstrap 441 folder, and it's in CSS folder. I have all my Sass files. So I'm going to go into, I'm going to close this one up. There we go. So I'm going to go, I've created a Sass file called site. So what we do is we're going to type import bootstrap 441 CSS bootstrap. So now we're all set. Now we can run this application, and it's going to look just the same as the default template. What we also need to do is we're going to create a compiler config. So I'm going to say that this file, styles.site SCSS, that's really hard to say. It's going to output this file to www.root CSS and site CSS. So now we're all set. All right. What I want to change some things when it comes to how this looks. So in the main layout.razor, it looks like this by default. So what I'm going to do, I don't want a sidebar. I want to have my menu at the top. So I'm going to get rid of that and just have the nav menu at the top. Next up, we have an about page or an about link. We don't want that either, so let's get rid of that. So now we have a div class main, and this is what I'm talking about. So in Bootstrap, we are kind of forced to use divs, or that's the recommended way of doing things. But in HTML5, we have a main class or a main element. So I can just get rid of this div and say, hey, I want a main instead. And then we have the last one, the div. We're going to replace that. Instead of content px4, we're going to say container. Then we're going to turn our eyes to the nav menu. So then this is how the default nav menu looks. We have a nav, and we have a bunch of classes. We have navbar expand large, we have navbar light, and so on. So what I can do is that I can take all of these and put them in a Sass file instead. So what I'm saying is that if I have a nav object, I want it to apply the navbar expand large, I wanted navbar light and background light, and have that in that, put that on that nav instead. So now I can remove all the classes. So now I only have a nav. If we look further down, I have just beneath the nav, I have an anchor, button, and a div. I can do the same thing there. So I can take the navbar brand, just move it there. I can take the toggler, move it there, and the collapse, move it there. So this makes our HTML look like this instead. Now I do realize that this is not the right solution for everyone. I might want to be a little bit more specific when it comes to the nav, but I can give it an ID and put the CSS there instead. The point is to move all the styling into the SAS files instead. And last but not least, we have the link. Same thing there. We have a nav bar nav item, nav link. So we're just going to move all of that into our navigation SAS file. And it's going to look like this instead. So if we take a look at the nav component, it's going to look like this instead. Way easier to read, less HTML to handle. So let's add our class there as well. So I'm going to say import navigation, and I don't have to supply SCSS here because it already knows that. So if I launch this, it's going to look something like this. So now I have the menu on top instead. It's going to work just as before. It's going to look pretty much the same. So let's go into form. So this is the default behavior of a form without any styling. So if I type Jimmy here, I don't know if you can see it, but it actually turned green. And if I do not supply an age, it's going to say, hey, age, you must supply an age. If we go back to Studio, we already saw a couple of demos with this in the beginning, but I'm using the required attributes to say that I need this to be something. I need it to be, and if you do not supply it, I want you to print out, please provide a name. And same thing goes with age. And what this is actually using is using the edit form. It's using data annotation validator, and it's using the input text and validation message. So this by default is going to add a class, or actually two classes. It's going to add modified, and it's going to add valid in this case. And if we do the same thing with the text box beneath, it's going to add modified and invalid. But Bootstrap has some really nice features. So we want to add the serotonin, dopamine into this solution. So what I can do is I can do like this. So I'm going to say that all input fields in my whole applications is going to add the form control. I want if it's invalid and if it's valid, I want it to have the form control. If it's invalid and modified, I want it to be invalid. And if it's valid and modified, I want it to be valid. So these are styles or classes that lives in Bootstrap. I even said that every button in my solution is going to be a button and a button primary. This might be a little bit too far. So you might want to do like this: primary button and add an extend button and extend button primary. What I really want to do is not to have specific styles in my project, specific Bootstrap styles. I want to extract them away. So if we go to site, and let's say I want to import forms. So we go into our demo site, we're going to reload this. And pro tip, you need to save as well. So now it looks a little bit different. So if I type Jimmy, it's going to say checkmark. Yeah, you did well. So this is going to add serotonin. It's going to say, hey, you did well. It's going to be positive reinforcements. It's going to work just the same with a red one. And it's going to show the age field as well. Next up, we have the fetch data. So let's take a look at that. So I've loaded a lot more data, and I have added a reload button. So what is happening here is that the user doesn't get anything back. They don't know what is happening. Is it loading? Is it just slow? Or is this all the data I have? Fair enough, this is perhaps a little bit too fast for them to do that kind of conclusion. But what I want to do here, I want to add something that shows them that I'm working on something. I'm going to go back. I'm going to add a spin kit. And I know that Ed Charbonneau is going to demo how to do this as a component later on. So spin kit. I'm not going to go into depth and show you this specific component. We're going to go back and I'm going to reload the page. So when I reload, I'm going to show you the spinner. I'm doing something. I'm loading the data. I'm also keeping date, temperature, and summary, the header, visible. So this is because you want to add dopamine again. You're building anticipation. You're preparing them for what data they're about to see instead of just having a blank page. Now, research shows that just putting the data on a page, just switching it on, all the data at the same time, older people and younger people have a problem with that. The cognitive load goes up, and the load page of a page is really the time it takes to load the page, as well as the cognitive load, or actually how fast you can understand it. So what I've done here is I have added an animation. So this animation is at 0%. I want it to be invisible, and I want it to be just a tiny bit smaller than the real size. At 85%, I want it to be fully visible, and I want it to be a little bit bigger. And at 100%, I want it to be fully visible and the right size. Then I'm creating a for loop in my SAS file. So I'm going to create 50 of these styles. It's going to take the table row, and for each one of these, it's going to add a little bit of delay. So it's going to be kind of a waterfall effect, if you will. So it's going to load this a little bit slower, but it's going to load it. It's fading in. So let's add that to our CSS as well. So we're going to import animations. So if we save and we go back, I'm going to reload. I'm not sure how well this is transferring over Skype, but it's a very different experience, and it's not that it doesn't take that much more time, but it will give the users a more. What we're actually doing here is that we're offloading the cognitive load to our visual cortex. So in this case, you can think about the visual cortex as a GPU. You're going to understand this way faster and way better. Let's take a look at another one. We have a form here. So I have a form 2. It's going to look at something like this. So this is how we add gamification to our form in this case. So I have a first name. I'm going to say my name is Jimmy, because it is. And here I've created a component that has the first, it includes the label, it includes the text box, it includes a short description. What is your name? And when I've typed that in, it's going to say, hey, nice to meet you. I can type in my last name. And I even have a way of adding a watermark here. So I can say, well, I'm a developer. Wow, developer, you say? That sounds interesting. And as you can see up here, I have a progress bar. So I can see that I'm 43% done. And this is the game. This is a very simple way of adding gamification, getting people to get a little bit more excited about filling out the form. Again, we have the checkbox and the checkboxes and all of that. So if we go back to our form, so what I've done here is I've added another attribute. I've added the display attribute. So I'm saying in my class that I want the name of this or the display name to be the first name. I want the description to be, what is your name? And I have the error message. please provide a name. And I even have I've reused the prompt to show the watermark. This looks like this in a component. So I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to blog about this. So please check out my blog in the last slide. So what we're doing here is that I have a label text, I have an input text, I have a small description, I can show errors. I don't have to show errors, but I can. I'm iterating over the validation messages. I have a success message. So if it validates correctly, it's going to show me the success message. And if we take a look at all the components here, or the code here, is using the properties on those components, or my personal class in this case. The progress summary is using just a normal progress bar that I downloaded from the internet. And it's using the validation summary that we saw in Dan's example in the beginning, the first session. So this is a copy of that, and it's going to use the same model to create what you see here. So if I remove my name, it's going to be, please provide a name, and I'm 29% done suddenly. Let's switch back. So I hope that you are as excited as I am about UX and what we actually can do with all of these things. So we do have some time for questions. Do we have any questions?
There is one question, actually.
Awesome.
Am I on?
Nope. So we're going to have to go. So yeah, we're going to have to put it right
Hold
there.
on. Are we on? Am I on now?
Okay. We're a little bit. Hey, there we go.
Okay. Cool.
Put it on there, Beth. All right. So the next question we got. Hey, is there a plan to integrate MS Fluent Design for web natively as an option with Blazor? Saw there's a community project on it. Have you heard anything about that, Jimmy?
I have not heard about that. That would be awesome.
Well,
I would love that feature.
Well, let me ask you this. Why would you love it? So for other people who haven't heard about it.
So I love the Fluent Design pattern. Since I'm a Windows developer MVP, I love SAML. I'm sorry, but I do. I'm not as comfortable using HTML, even though that's my daily job. So I would love to see more Fluent Design in web pages as well.
Perfect. I think we have another question that Beth had put
Actually,
up.
it's more of a comment.
More of a comment? Okay, so Blazor Scope CSS components from Jimmy Engstrom. This is pretty slick. So are you looking for people to help you with the project, or is this, how are you treating these components?
Which components
the
are we talking about?
The Blazor Scope CSS, what you were showing in your presentation.
Okay, so that's not my project. There's someone else.
Oh, okay.
That's Alexander Rice that made that component. I personally don't think that I like to have these more generic styles when I do my development. I would love to have discussions with people that find this, who are very passionate about this.
Sure.
But I'm personally not doing anything with that.
Well, let me ask you this question. So I'm a back-end server developer. I've been doing ASP.NET for many, many years. What would you recommend to me, someone like myself who is very knowledgeable in the platform, to get used to understanding of what is UX? How do we go about creating something that is not necessarily attractive, but usable and friendly for people to use my software outside of just using something like Bootstrap and something off the shelf?
Mm-hmm. So for me, figuring out the why is the biggest change for me. So dig in, find resources on the web. There's lots of things out there, and don't just do things because people say that you should do it a particular way, but invest time in understanding why you should do it in a particular way. And for someone that is new, definitely use Bootstrap or any other framework. There's no reason to invent the wheel again, if you will.
Perfect. That's a great answer. We have another question as we were asking this. Are there frameworks available to directly inject serotonin and dopamine into our apps using UI? have we figured that out one yet?
Not that I know of, but that would be awesome, right?
And if we could find out a way to do it, the world will be just a better place, I'm assuming so.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, Jimmy, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. It's evening where you're at right now, right? That's why it's all kind of dark. We were discussing that earlier. So that's the nice thing about .NET Conf is that we get speakers all over the world having great content, sharing, and being passionate about what they do love. What we're going to go into a quick break as we get Jeremy Lickness from the UK. Actually, he's from Redmond, but he's in the UK, up and ready, and another Skype call. So we'll be right back. Thank you so much.